If you're looking for clear, pro-life thinking, cutting-edge apologetics, and a fresh approach to abortion dialogue, you've come to the right place. This is the Equipped for Life podcast.
Well, I've been welcoming lots of different guests to the Equipped for Life podcast lately, but I don't know if I've been as excited to bring anyone else to the Equipped for Life podcast in quite some time. We have Emily Albrecht, the Emily Albrecht from St. Olaf Students for Life, and now also raising support to be on our staff. You are going to be on the podcast a lot, but mainly later. You're kind of in support raising mode and getting ready. You've got to graduate and stuff like that before you come on.
That little thing called graduating college.
Little things, but at least you know where you're going to work.
Yes.
So for those of you who have not watched every video that we put out on our YouTube channel, we actually featured Emily in a video at the end of last year, about a 10-minute long video with you and the awesome Meredith, your other co-president. Hi, Meredith. You're so awesome. And just kind of telling your story. And so I don't want to get into all of that right now, but why don't you just give the very, very short version of your story, just for those who aren't familiar with who you are or why I was really excited to hire you as our next kind of content creator, speaker, writer, coach person. What is the short version of your story? And then if people want to watch the longer version, I'll link to the video below of you and Meredith telling the story. It's really awesome. There's music and everything. It's
you should really go watch the longer
It's really
version.
Great. It's really great. But what's just a short version of your story, just so people have some background before we do this conversation?
Yeah. So I grew up pro-life, but I didn't really start getting involved in the movement until I was in college, when I really found my beliefs being challenged. I walked into a campus that was really pro-choice, and my group struggled a lot in the beginning. The group had been around for a while, but hadn't really been getting much traction. We experienced a lot of vandalism, a lot of hatred. There were protests on our campus against our local pregnancy resource center. It was not a good situation.
It was a bad situation.
It's a real bad situation. But then kind of the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, when I took over running the club, kind of by default, because there weren't really very many other people, we discovered Equal Rights Institute. And that has really honestly transformed everything about our club and the trajectory of my life. Because, I'm sitting here right now recording this podcast with Josh, which is the strangest experience that I never thought I would be having. But here we are.
Yeah.
And so we have had a really incredible transformation on our campus of students coming to respect our club, administration coming to respect our club, and pro-choice students becoming pro-life because of having dialogues with us at our outreach tables. And so you should really go watch the longer video to get the whole story. But
it is awesome.
I have a really awesome pro-life club.
A lot of you have heard Rachel, who used to co-host this podcast with me. Rachel resigned earlier this year and just wanted to move on to other things. And so Emily is going to be her replacement. It's just she's not on staff yet because she has to do a couple things. She's got to raise support and she's got to graduate. And so hopefully Emily will be coming on as kind of my regular co-host, or at least on the podcast quite often, probably starting next summer or so. For our first podcast, we thought we would go ahead and talk about a movie that just came out that I don't know how many pro-life people are really talking about it. I don't feel like I've seen a lot of chatter. I've seen a little bit of chatter. I don't know how many people are even aware that it's there because it's on HBO, and I feel like it's not
a lot of people don't.
Ton of pro-lifers are watching HBO. So there is not a pro-life movie. There's an abortion-related movie that has come out on HBO, and movies like this can affect the cultural conversation. There are things that can get kind of into people's minds that are going to be affecting some of the people that you talk to. So I think it's good for us to at least be aware of them and kind of how to think about them. We've done this before. We've talked about mainly documentaries in the past. We talked about the Norman McCorvey documentary. I did a thing about reversing Roe. And so while that's been kind of more my wheelhouse, this is like a fictional drama, kind of a dramedy, kind of a
movie. Yes, it's more comedy, I'd say, even than drama.
Yeah, and there's a lot of comedy, and this is one of the things, one of the nicer things I can say about the movies. There's parts that are legitimately funny. I think the writers, were a lot better at writing comedy than they were at writing this movie in a way that wasn't preachy.
Yes,
that was something that surprised me, because I feel like typically when I watch Hollywood movies or Hollywood-made movies, and obviously there's going to be a bias. Every writer is going to have a bias. You expect that, right?
Right.
But even so, like the movies that are like making some kind of like a pro-choice point at some point or something like that, are typically more subtle than this movie.
Nothing about this movie
is subtle.
was subtle.
It's pretty in your face. It's like right on the nose. And so I don't know that it's really a great movie. It's less good than I think I expected. I expected it to be a better made movie. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the movie as a movie, although I can't like not talk about that at all because that's definitely kind of the eye that I am looking at things like this at. So whether pro-life people watch it or not, I think it's good to be aware of. So we're going to talk about it. So spoiler alert, we're going to spoil the whole dang movie. So if you want to see it for yourself, which I don't think would be a bad thing. Like I think a lot of times it's good for people to see the thing or hear like conservative commentary on a speech that President Obama gives or Joe Biden or whatever. It's like, okay, maybe listen to it first and then listen to whatever your favorite, pundit is talk about it. That's fine. So feel free to watch the movie. I wouldn't watch it with little kids, obviously. Okay.
Yeah,
like,
definitely not.
it's an HBO movie. It's not like super graphic or whatever,
Right.
but it's not made for young kids. And then if you want to come back and listen to us talk about it, because we're about to spoil the whole dang thing. So having said that, now, welcome back. Now
Hope
that
you've
you've
watched
seen the movie, let's real quick, Emily, why don't you just kind of walk through the main beats of the plot? So then we can kind of go through, we've got kind of some categories that relate to the movie that we're going to talk about, like the portrayal of pro-life people in the movie. Spoiler alert, not great.
Really not great.
really, really, really not great. But none of that's going to make sense unless we kind of explain for it, because I just know a lot of our listeners are just not interested in watching the movie. So, and that's fine. So tell us about the movie Unpregnant.
Okay, so it starts out, we meet this high school girl, I believe she's 17, and her name is Veronica. And Veronica and her boyfriend, Kevin, are having sex, and she gets pregnant.
Yep.
All because he apparently knew that the condom had broke, and he just decided that not telling her was the right thing to do.
Right.
So he didn't tell her anything.
Super like non-confrontational,
Right.
basically, is how they
not a good
portray
idea.
it.
Exactly. And so she finds out that she's pregnant. She actually takes a pregnancy test at school.
Yep.
And the pregnancy test is found by her former best friend, Bailey Butler.
Mhm.
And she and Bailey have had this big separation. They're not really friends anymore.
They were best friends growing up
Yes.
as little kids. Yeah.
Exactly. And now they're really not friends.
Yeah.
And so Veronica has decided that she wants to get an abortion.
Yeah.
There's really no debate in her mind about whether or not she wants to do that. That's not a part of the movie. She has made up her mind that she's getting an abortion and she's going to do whatever she needs to get it.
Yeah.
And in Missouri, which is where she is, you can't get one without parental consent. And she really does not want to notify her parents because her parents, quote from Bailey Butler, are Jesus freaked.
Yeah.
That was the quote. We presume that they're Catholic because there's like a picture
there's
of the
like
Pope on
there's
the
like
wall.
a really obvious drawing of Pope Francis like looking at you.
Yes, on the wall. So we're presuming that they're Catholic, and she does not want to tell her parents.
We don't have to presume. I'll guarantee you. There's no Protestants that
okay.
have a picture of Pope Francis that big in their house. I'm
Okay,
just
that's a
gonna
good point. Yes. Okay, so she has
They're
Catholic
super
parents,
Catholic, yeah.
super Catholic, Jesus freaked parents,
Right.
according to Bailey.
Right.
And so she doesn't want to tell them.
Yeah.
And so she realizes through looking up what the abortion laws are in different states that she needs to drive hundreds of miles all the way to Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Almost 1,000 miles.
Yes, in order to get her abortion without needing her parents' consent.
Yep.
And she doesn't have a really great way to do that. She doesn't have access to a car.
Yep.
So she ends up asking Bailey Butler to help drive her across the country.
Yeah.
And they go on this epic journey of many mishaps,
Right.
car
At
breakdowns.
this point, it's basically a road
stolen
trip
car.
movie.
It just turns into a girl bonding road trip movie
Right.
as we're going to get an abortion.
Right.
And along the way, we meet some pro-life people.
Mhm.
We drive a stolen car. All sorts of very interesting things happen. And then the movie culminates with her abortion experience, which is honestly, it's portrayed as the most calming,
It's like the
cathartic
best
moment.
abortion experience ever.
It's got this beautiful spa music in the background.
Yeah.
Like we'll get into that later. But
Yeah.
that is like the okay, everything's gonna be fine now. We've made it.
Yeah.
Life is beautiful moment.
Success.
And then the movie ends and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
She has solved all of the world's problems. She got her abortion. She didn't die in the middle of the desert somewhere stranded.
Right.
Everything's good.
Yep. That's pretty much the movie. Okay, so let's talk about the portrayal of pro-lifers. This is a thing like we talked about. We did a thing. What was 13 Reasons Why? We did a podcast, Rich and I, on 13 Reasons Why, where recently they had portrayed sidewalk counselors in like the worst possible light. It was just awful. And so we were just kind of comparing and contrasting. All right, here's what they're showing off, because you can put anything on film. Like we work with a lot of sidewalk counselors. Here's what they tend to be like. And it's just different. And it's good for people to know that it's different.
Yeah.
There are several pro-lifers portrayed in this movie. Let's talk about how they are portrayed. Again, this movie is not subtle. Okay. Like I get annoyed sometimes when conservatives call things like propaganda, because sometimes it's like, it's not that bad. Okay. Like it's not like I'm super offended anytime someone says something a little bit mean about conservatives on the media.
This one goes a little further
this
than that.
movie is pretty annoying. So let's talk about Kevin, the boyfriend, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you go first?
So Kevin, the boyfriend, is essentially a straw man of what pro-lifers think that the boyfriend should do in that kind of situation. So there's the stereotype that pro-choice people have that has been very exaggerated. So as soon as Veronica tells Kevin that she's pregnant, his instantaneous reaction is, I'm getting down on one knee and proposing to you right now. He already bought the ring, which was also super cringy.
When Emily says instantaneous, he's not exaggerating.
It was literally instantaneous.
She's like, super weird.
I'm pregnant. And he's like, this is great. We can be together forever.
Instantly
I will now
on
pull
a
out
knee.
a ring.
Will you marry me? This is going to be awesome.
And it's just so unexpectedly sudden that it's awkward.
Yeah.
And he spends the rest of the movie basically following her around.
Stalking her.
Now, to be fair to Kevin, he was stalking her using the Find My Friends app, which Bailey references in the middle. And I would not consider that stalking. If you have Find My Friends, that's what people do with the Find My Friends app. You use it to figure out where your friends are.
But like the fact that he keeps on following her when she keeps on saying, I don't want you around right now.
Yes.
That's the part that...
He takes it too far.
Yes.
He definitely did. I do not deny that. But they, to his credit, they make it appear in the movie like he is crazy stalking her.
Yeah.
And even Bailey is like, why didn't you just delete your Find My Friends app? Like, you kind of, he knows where you are. It's not like he was trying to like trace your car and like do it sneakily. He did not do it sneakily.
Yeah.
He found out where she was through very normal means. And so to his credit, I still think what he did was wrong, but to his credit.
So let's talk about him in the sense of, pro-life people often talk. Pro-life speakers, I've made points similar to this before. It's not like a main talk that I give or something, but certainly I've talked about how, we talk about like the idea of like, why is abortion not just a women's issue? It's just like partly because abortion happens so often because of jerk men who, when they hear that their girlfriend is pregnant, are just like, I'm out unless you have an abortion, or are like coercing her into the abortion. There's one study that says that 64% of women felt coerced into their abortion by either the boyfriend or maybe her parents, could be the boyfriend's parents, at worst, like her pastor or youth pastor or something like that. Like all that can happen. But the boyfriend, certainly a lot of times, the boyfriend sees the pregnancy as an obstacle to the life he's wanting to have right now, right? And so he might be the one wanting the abortion a lot more than she does. And so we've talked about like, that is not okay. We need to help men learn how to be men again, like responsible men who are like, okay, I know this isn't what we had planned, but like, I'm going to be here for you. I'm going to be supportive of you. Even if this is going to be hard, like I'll be there for you, like that whole thing. And so we say that is a good thing. So can you try to help people understand why what Kevin does in the sense of like, he's proposing marriage? Like a lot of pro-lifers, I feel like would be like, at least on like, if you don't see the movie, it's hard to watch the movie and not be like, dude, what's wrong with you? But like, if we just hearing us say, oh, he heard she was pregnant and he proposed marriage, like that seems like the responsible thing to do. So can you help people understand who haven't seen the movie why he is so derpy?
So one of the reasons is that he knew that this was coming in some sense. So he knew that the condom broke. He suspected she was pregnant. He said nothing.
Yeah.
He like pre-purchased the ring. He was ready for this moment when she would tell him. And
super
while
cool.
there's a part of you that's like, okay, well, I'm glad he was at least trying to do the right thing.
Right.
He took so many missteps getting there that he handled the situation very, very poorly.
Yeah. Yeah. He's also like, I think, and the movie works really hard to show you like they're not right for each other. Right? Like, any chance they have to make fun of this guy, like they basically portray him as a total redneck hick. Like for just this one example, he's like, she's like, how do you afford this really nice ring? He's like, I sold 2 of my motorbikes right after. I've still got 2 left. Like, okay.
Yes. How many motorbikes does he have?
4 is the answer.
Yes.
And it's like they're doing those things like portray, like he's kind of a hick. He's also not a very good person in the sense of like he is not treating her well. The way he handled this whole situation,
right?
He's really
their whole
dumb.
relationship has been around these lies, essentially,
And so like they're not right for like they're so different. They're so non-compatible, basically at a personality level. That then when he is like hyper proposing marriage, like he's in love with this girl basically, and she is so not in love with
really
him.
Not interested.
She's done. I don't feel like she was really into him before. She's certainly not into him now. And so then they really portray him as kind of the stalker, just keeps on showing up, be like, don't abort this baby, kind of like just super over the top. And it was interesting to see like where I saw like another pro-life person who had kind of done commentary on this movie was like, she was upset because the movie is like portraying, she's like what, or at least the way that I took it, maybe if, I don't want to straw man her, but the way that I took her commentary is like, they're taking what boyfriends are supposed to do in this moment and then turning people away from that. The movie is encouraging boyfriends to be less responsible and to be less likely to try to make this work. And I kind of felt like they're just making him seem like a total idiot and a bad person. And of course he is right to not be with him because there's this like, there is a balance. There's a middle ground between the guy who's like, have this abortion or I'm going to walk, and Kevin.
Yes.
Kevin is the extreme end on the other end of the spectrum, which is why it's a total straw man of what pro-lifers say guys ought to do. I hope it doesn't have the effect of like, because I kind of feel like if I can make a guess of what is the goal, what is the intended effect, it could have that effect of teaching guys that, maybe not so much that you should never try to stay with the girl or take responsibility, but it certainly pushes the you have no say mantra. Like, this is completely up to her. It's her body. How dare you say anything about what you want? And I definitely think that's not a good message. We would want boyfriends and girlfriends or husbands and wives to be able to have these conversations, but in a much more healthy way than Kevin did.
Yeah, Kevin did not do a great job. I think that the movie accurately portrays the fact that we do want guys to not do what Kevin did. Like we are right when we're watching the movie to not like Kevin and not like how he handled the situation. Right. So I think that's accurate, but they're not portraying the way that pro-lifers actually want those conversations to go down.
Yeah.
We don't want the man to have no say at all. We also don't want the man to be stalking her.
Right. Yes. Okay, so then let's move on from Kevin to, oh my goodness.
Okay.
The creepy pro-life Christian couple.
Kidnapping. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. I have a lot of thoughts here.
Yeah.
Let me
so
just
explain this part of the movie.
So Veronica and Bailey, on their wild adventure, stop at a fairgrounds of all places. And Bailey is making the phone call to make Veronica's abortion appointment. And this couple apparently overhears her making the appointment. And so they approach, and the moment you meet them, like I watched this movie with my club, Students for Life at St. Olaf, and all of us started looking at each other and we were like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Because it looks like the start of a horror movie. They're so nice that it's creepy.
Yeah.
They're like,
it's over the top.
We're driving to New Mexico. We would love for you to join us. How about we leave in 15 minutes?
Yeah.
it's just that like the picture.
And
of
they've
their
already got
voices,
this other ride.
They already have another ride.
And you're just like,
they,
don't get in the car.
Right, the entire mentality of you watching it is like, do not go with these people. Go with the other ride. This is the wrong choice.
Right.
Like we all know.
And you don't know why
bad.
yet. You just know.
You know that this is a bad decision for her.
Yeah.
So they get in the car with these people and they fall asleep in the car. And they end up at this family's house. The family's supposed to be taking them to the abortion clinic in Albuquerque. And they end up at their house. And as soon as we go in the house, it turns into very stereotypical, exaggerated, hyper-Christian couple. They have this like epically big family picture on the wall. And all of the children's names are biblical.
Yes.
And the husband and wife are having this very forced commentary. And it's so awkward.
Talk a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh. I think my favorite moment. So they feed the girls breakfast.
Right.
And the husband and wife are having this commentary back and forth about how delicious it is. And just using all of these very forced, like in terms of endearment for each other. Like, you really outdid yourself today, honey. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
Right.
Could you be a dear and put the coffee on?
Right.
And you're sitting there going, this is so awkward.
Right. Yeah. And then as they start looking around the house, it gets more crazy.
Yes. And then this music starts to play underneath it. And suddenly we're not in a comedy anymore. You're in a horror movie.
Yeah.
Like legit, they're playing horror movie music.
Yeah.
And Bailey's going exploring around the house, trying to find the bathroom. I'm pretty sure that's not what she was trying to do.
No.
She was definitely not. But she claimed she was trying to find the bathroom.
Right.
And she's like going up in this dark hallway upstairs, and the music keeps getting more intense. And I swore that a vampire was gonna like jump out of a closet. And she rounds a corner and she finds a room,
the attic,
full of pro-life posters.
Yep. They're hanging on all the walls. I just want to let Hollywood know, pro-life activists don't have rooms where we have covered the entire walls, wallpaper style, with different pro-life posters.
It's so bad. And the way they do the like filming of it, I don't know the right word for this, Josh, you got to take this over, but they like show it in these weird like jagged ways.
Yeah,
where
they're off angle.
Yes, they're off angle. You just feel super uncomfortable. And then the husband appears in the doorway out of nowhere, like a horror movie character that just popped out.
With no personal
space. And Bailey screams.
Yeah.
And like they go tearing out of the house.
Yeah.
And just terrified because they realize that they have been kidnapped by these insane pro-lifers. And then
it gets better.
It gets better. If you did not think that was good enough.
Right.
My favorite moment of the entire film.
Yes. I know exactly what you're going to say.
And I was not expecting
my
this was
eyes
coming.
went so wide. Even though everything I've seen up until this point, they steal their truck. They are flooring it. And over the horizon,
there's this PRC ultrasound RV that this couple owns randomly in the middle of the country. They just own this PRC RV.
They're clearly, this is the PRC.
Right. This is like,
this is the RV. This is Pregnancy Center.
Yes.
And what is on the front of the RV, Emily?
A giant baby head.
like a poster.
Yes, like a poster,
not a real.
Of a giant baby head.
Just huge, like with a pacifier in its mouth kind of a thing.
And so
covering
we have
the entire
this
thing.
Epic chase scene between the girls who have stolen the pro-lifers like
truck
normal
or
car.
Whatever,
and the epic ultrasound RV. And they're chasing each other through the dirt roads in the middle of nowhere and off a cliff.
Yeah.
They chase them off a cliff.
And he's like on this megahorn because apparently that's what they do in the RV.
Yes.
You know, it's like, stop, like we're going to help you make the right decision. Like this whole thing. And it's like, is this what Hollywood thinks pregnancy center RVs are like? I mean, like this was kind of my main question watching the entire movie is I actually don't know how much they're trying to like kind of spoof and like exaggerate for the sake of humor or drama or whatever. Or is this kind of like, are they exaggerating by just 10% just to like push it a little bit over the edge? And they're like, no, this is fairly accurate when we hear about these creepy pregnancy centers with their RVs. Or do they know this is way beyond the pale of what 95% of the pro-life movement is doing? And I still don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I wish I knew the answer. I mean, my vibe from just doing outreach, at least on my campus, is I feel like the actual couple and their like somewhat creepy hyper religiousness, I feel like that is not exaggerated very much from what people think. I think that people realize that a pregnancy RV would not chase people off a cliff in order to try to stop them from getting an abortion. Like, I think that they realize that that is a hyper exaggeration.
Yeah.
But the actual couple themselves and how they act and how they talk.
Yeah.
I think that that is more in line with what people actually think.
So then I wish that the people writing this movie knew real, normal pro-lifers. Because, you know, I know we say DBW, don't be weird.
But like this movie was some really weird pro-lifers.
This is like, this is not how pro-life people act. Like, okay, there are a few. We've got this, I've got in fact, the RV actually reminded me, I've made this presentation that Jacob and I have yet to give, but we're going to give in Oregon next year, called Don't Be Weird on the Sidewalk. And it's kind of like a DBW talk, but also like some sidewalk counseling tips. So it's kind of like, here's some things to do and here's some things like not to do. And I grabbed some hilarious pictures off the internet of the weirdest fringe element of the pro-life movement. People who are trying their best, okay? Yes. Like they're trying to do good, but legitimately they're doing like really super awkward things. Like, for example, hanging baby dolls like from trees, like just that there's like baby dolls, just like, and it's like, ooh. Do you know how creepy this looks? No. This is super weird. So like, it's going to be kind of a fun talk. You know, we're not going to make too much fun, but also be like, okay, don't do this. That. Okay, so I'm not going to say there is no one that acts at all like this. I'm just saying this is, you're picking on the 1% that is way over the top. And this is not the way that most pro-life people are. And I don't know if at this point in 2020, where people can't have good conversations with each other, is this actually helpful to portray the other side as completely crazy? I don't think so.
I don't think it's helpful.
And I wouldn't like it if pro-life people did this with pro-choice people either, okay? This is not just like a bias, like, I don't like that they picked on my side. Like, I would be so mad if a pro-lifers made a movie that was portraying pro-choice people like this.
Yeah. I don't know. The one line that really got to me when I was watching this section, because I feel like the majority of it is really, really frustrating. And I'm like, this is not how pro-life people act.
Yeah.
But there was one line that the husband, like, granted, he's screaming it into the megaphone, so that part was not accurate. But the line itself was, we want to help women make smart, educated decisions. And that line really got to me because that actually is a line that I have heard and still do hear pro-life people say, including myself. So a little backstory there. My club is called Students for Life at St. Olaf, right? Yeah. But that was not always our name.
Oh, interesting.
So when the club was first started, the name was Students Advocating Informed Decisions, which is like freakily similar to that sentence.
That is. It's pretty close.
Yes. Students Advocating Informed Decisions, otherwise known as SAID, abbreviated. And that was the name of the club when I first came in and took over and started doing things. And we kept the name for the first little while. And I understand what the motivation was for the people that originally, created that name. And I understand why.
What is that motivation? Yeah. Like, explain that.
So I think the idea is that we really do, like, we're not lying. We do want people to be presented with the facts about what abortion is.
Yes.
And we believe that if people are presented with those facts, they will ultimately change their mind and not have an abortion or become pro-life.
More often than
exactly.
otherwise, right?
So we really do want to help women make smart, educated decisions. Like, we're not lying, but the language of that can be misleading to pro-choice people. And we discovered that at my club pretty quickly when we started doing outreach, and we still had the name Students Advocating Informed Decisions.
Interesting. Tell me, I've not heard this story. So what happened?
We had so many students come up to us and not want to talk about abortion itself, like not want to talk about our sorrel table, They wanted to talk about our name because at St. Olaf, there's a rule that if you're doing tabling, you have to have somewhere on the table a sign identifying your student org.
Okay.
You can't just like pretend to not be who you are.
Right.
So we had a sign like saying, we usually keep it pretty small, but we have to have one.
Right.
And a lot of students also just already knew who we were because there's a lot of controversy on campus I discovered about our name.
Yes.
Because students felt like we were being manipulative. They're like, we know you're pro-life. And that means that you're not really trying to help women make decisions. Like, you don't want women to have all the information. You want to manipulate them into believing your information. They saw the name as being a deliberate propaganda tactic, essentially on our part, to try to get people to listen to us just so that we could manipulate them. Now,
like kind of hiding the pro-life side of it a little bit.
Like we're deliberately hiding who we are. That way people will listen to us.
I can get that.
And so I understand why people use that phrasing because I feel like pro-lifers don't feel like they're lying when they're saying that.
Yeah.
But the pro-choice students that I've talked to really feel like that's dishonest.
Yeah.
And it made them so much less interested in wanting to engage with me. Like, they didn't want to talk about abortion at all. They just wanted to talk about how much they hated our name.
Yeah.
And the fact that they hated our club because we weren't being honest about who we are and what we stand for.
Yeah.
And so about halfway through my sophomore year, like I took over the club after my freshman year. About halfway through my sophomore year, the core group of us started talking about the shared experience we were having with the name at the table. And none of us had been there when the name was, created. We just inherited it. And we were like, okay, maybe we need to start chatting about changing this name.
Yeah.
Because we were all getting similar feedback from students. And so we officially did the name change the summer between my sophomore and my junior year. We did all the paperwork with the college. And the feedback that we got was shockingly positive.
Really?
From the people in the student org's office, like the adults that work for, student organizations and help students to run their clubs, and administration and students. Everyone wanted our name changed, even though we were like being more obvious of like, hello, St. Olaf has a pro-life club.
Right.
Because our name is now Students for Life at St. Olaf. We also became an official Students for Life chapter at that point. Because up until that point, we were not.
Yeah.
We were just kind of this free-floating pro-life group. And so we got connected with Students for Life of America, and then we officially changed our name. And students were way more willing to talk to me about abortion, oddly enough.
Wow.
Because they felt like we were being honest. They came up and they knew who we were and what we stood for. They didn't feel like I was trying to manipulate them. And so
interesting.
I feel like that language, while I understand why pro-lifers use it, the idea of like, we want to educate people and have them make smart decisions, I don't think that's actually very helpful for your average pro-choice person.
Yeah. They're going to misread that as we want to propagandize you in our false information or something like that, as opposed to like, we want to empower you and make sure you've heard both sides or something like that. Yeah.
Right. That's what pro-lifers mean. When pro-lifers say that sentence, they mean we want to empower you so you see all the facts and both sides. And ultimately, we think if you hear both sides, you'll choose to be pro-life.
Right.
Pro-choicers hear that statement as, we're going to do anything in our power to only give you our side of the story, to give you false information. That way you feel like you have to be pro-life because we have manipulated you.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I'm so glad you talked about that.
Okay. So we've talked about how ridiculous this whole pro-life kidnapping concept was, but I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't at least take a second to talk about it seriously.
Let's take this deeper like we do.
Okay. Welcome to ERI.
That's right.
All right. So, okay, Josh, if there actually was a real person that wanted to kidnap an abortion vulnerable woman or a woman that was literally on her way to get an abortion, like was
try
the
to
case
get her
in
to
this
miss
film.
an appointment.
Exactly.
Or something.
Like they were essentially trying to prevent her from making it to her appointment on time because they knew when her appointment was.
Right.
And they were kidnapping her so that she wouldn't be able to have the abortion. Is that actually morally permissible? Like, let's actually consider that question for a second.
Right.
Like, could pro-life kidnapping ever actually be okay?
I mean, after all, if abortion is actually killing babies, if we really believe that abortion is killing babies, like,
then shouldn't we be doing?
Wouldn't you kidnap? So, like, I get asked questions like this all the time. Not usually about kidnapping, but I get asked questions about like, if pro-lifers really thought abortion was killing, then they would be acting differently. They would be having hundreds of them blocking abortion clinics at best. That's like the best end of it. And then like it gets like worse from there. It's like you'd be killing abortion doctors, or you'd be bombing clinics, or like all these different like war tactics. So I understand why it's a question that's going to come up, because of course, yes, we do think that abortion is killing babies. It's really, really bad. And basically what people do is in their mind, they do something that we teach people to do, trot out a toddler. They're like, well, what if toddlers were getting killed? What would we do? And then I think they end up making mistakes because they're
thinking like along the lines, if let's say that I knew a woman was about to kill her toddler,
right?
Could I kidnap her to prevent her from killing her toddler?
Right.
That's just like to spell that out. I think that's where people kind of go with that.
Right.
And they take the very good trot out a toddler argument, but then they start to apply it elsewhere, and then we start to get
it's out of context.
Yes.
It's like, and I'll tell them like, look, if we ended up in a horrible situation, like this wouldn't be in my lifetime, but in hundreds of years, culture has just gone even further away from the pro-life worldview, or has gone anti-religious or something, whatever has happened. And now philosophers like Peter Singer and his predecessors sort of like get into the public consciousness enough, and we kind of say, hey, not only are fetuses not persons, but also babies aren't persons because they're not self-aware. And so you're not a person until you're like 18 months old. And so it becomes legal and normal to kill babies in the first 18 months of life. Let's just like say that happened. Okay, if that was happening, it was happening all the time, and culture was generally for it. And when I say that, what I mean in the same way that culture is generally for abortion. So the culture, there's kind of this like these two things going on. One, most people think that Roe versus Wade should not be overturned based on the way they understand Roe versus Wade. Which
most people do not really understand what Roe versus Wade is. But
and Roe versus Wade isn't even, it's not even the thing. It's Casey v. Planned Parenthood, but whatever. They don't even understand that. It's symbolic. But most people think that abortion should be legal, at least in the first trimester, generally speaking. But most people also think that there should be more restrictions on abortion than there currently are. So like America is one of not that many countries that has not completely banned late-term abortions. Right. And the list of other countries that are on that list are not usually the countries that you want to be on the same list of, as like the way that they handle human rights things and stuff like that. So it's like, so those things are both true. So it's like, right. Anytime either side is like claiming like whole total victory of the culture, they're both wrong. The culture is still talking. We have a lot more talking to do. We're still sort of in the middle functionally on that. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, so then what I'll say is like, imagine if the situation was like actually comparable to abortion now, because some woman illegally drowning her toddler is not what the abortion situation is right now. Or like a terrorist group kidnapping some toddlers and holding them in a building, and they're going to kill them throughout the day. Like that's an analogy I've heard made about abortion clinics. I'm like, that's not the situation. Like, of course, then you bring in the SWAT team. Like, I get it. Yeah. But that's not in that situation, I would be arguing for doing the same things that I'm doing now. We would want it to become illegal. We would want to legally protect toddlers and newborns. And a lot of times to pull that off, you've got to change culture to some extent. I kind of think like it's never one or the other. It's like some people will be like, well, you got to like just focus on culture. Don't even worry about laws. And some other people want to say, just focus on laws, because then, like they'll use like the Martin Luther King quote, I can't force the white man to love me, but I can force him not to lynch me. Okay. I basically think of these two things as like these two like metal balls that are connected with like a cord, and they kind of tug and pull at each other. They kind of, there's like this momentum that they give each other. And so culture needs to change. Laws need to change. Sometimes the laws affect culture a little bit because of the discussion, the debate that it forces. And then sometimes culture can affect things. And it just kind of goes like that. And so I would be saying, we should be doing like educational events and talking about why actually newborns are persons, because self-awareness is actually not a necessary condition of personhood. And we'd be doing those talks and trying to convince people. Maybe we would be using graphic science in context where it was persuasive to people. And we would be trying to change the laws. We would be doing all those things. I would not be rushing into any place that killed the toddlers and bombing them or killing people or any of those things. And the problem, and this is why I'm glad you asked this question, the reason why I wrote an article on this like a long time ago was because up until that point, virtually every article I had ever seen pro-life people write about why it's wrong to bomb abortion clinics, like the pro-life movement all comes out. Anytime some quote unquote pro-lifer does something illegal at an abortion clinic.
Yeah.
Like there was a shooting in Colorado at a Planned Parenthood several years ago. Like the entire pro-life movement comes out and like vocally says we're against this. Okay, but then when they answer why they're against it, it's usually pragmatic arguments. If we do this, it's going to turn more people against us, and it'll actually take us longer to overturn Roe, Casey, than it would have been otherwise.
Which
and
I
it's
think
like,
is true.
Yes, that is true.
But
you're right.
It's not the most helpful response.
No, because of what that says to me as a reader is you don't have a principled problem with it. You just like, because it's practically not helpful to your cause, you're opposed to it.
Right.
And I was interested in writing an article on why it would be wrong at a principled level to, in this case, kidnap women. So so this thing came up 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. You've read this article way more recently than I have, but like Abolish Human Abortion, which is a pro-life group that doesn't like us and we don't love the things that they do. Like
we'll put a link to this
we're pretty
article in the
different.
description.
We'll link to the article, and we're not going to get into all the weeds, but they had been falsely accused of having a van that they were going to use to kidnap girls on the way to abortion clinic appointments. So that turned out to be fake. AHA said, no, we're opposed to that. And so the first part of the article was kind of defending like, even though I don't like a lot of the things you do, I don't want people spreading false information about you. So publicly, I'm with you. You're right. Here's the evidence. But then I kind of wanted to take the opportunity to do something that I've been wishing pro-life people had done for a long time, which is, why is it really wrong to bomb an abortion clinic or kill an abortion doctor if you could save like all these lives, kind of a thing? Like beyond the pragmatic, what if the pragmatic thing is not even there? What if it actually wouldn't hurt the pro-life cause? And you can read the article for the full response. Tim helped me with it. We got into the weeds on objectivism versus absolutism, but we're not going to do that right now. The main point that I wanted to make, and the main thing that I say to people who ask me about it is, because a lot of times people will make comparisons to people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer or someone like that. And it's like, hey, that was a war.
That was a very different situation.
The rules are different at war. Like, I don't even understand why I have to explain this sometimes. But like, yes, that was a war. That was different. We're not at war. And very importantly, America is not a despot. I don't care how freaked out you are about religious liberty. Like, I'm on David France's side on this, okay? Like, you don't need to be that worried about religious liberty. Our religious liberty is fine. Our religious liberty is more protected than it ever has been in the past. In fact, even at the end of Obama's term, religious liberty was safer than it ever had been in the past. And I will link to an article if you want the evidence on that. We've never talked about this on the podcast. I'm just like, I'm all fired up. But like case after case after case, because he was like a lawyer working with ADF for part of the time, but he spent like 25 years defending religious liberty. This guy understands exactly like what liberties are at risk and what liberties are not at risk. Okay, religious liberty, generally speaking, is pretty safe. That's not the thing. So we're not a despot. We still have freedom of speech. We are not like, right before World War II Germany, like at all.
It's not even close.
And it's not even like it's close. Like, yes, the Supreme Court, like even before President Trump nominated Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, we were still like freedom of speech cases were winning at like a 7-2 or 6-3 margin basically every single time. Like the Supreme Court has been very, very solidly pro First Amendment when it comes to freedom of speech issues for like a long time. Like that's not been as big of a concern. There's other concerns. I've got other concerns, okay? But I'm not worried about freedom of speech. I'm not too worried about religious liberty the way things have gone. There are certainly people, there are activists, there are LGBT activists who would like there to be less religious liberty and will go after a masterpiece cake shop and things like that. But generally speaking, they're not winning in court and they're not winning in public opinion either. So we are not a despot, and that just makes us a very, very different situation. So I think as long as there is freedom of speech, the ability for us to be in something like a democratic republic where people can affect government, where people can affect the laws, even if it's slow, because it takes a long time to change a lot of people's opinions about a given subject, especially a subject like abortion. As long as that's true, I don't believe, have a principled excuse for going outside the law and harming people in order to get our way. I think there are other arguments that could also be made. There are other principled arguments against, but I think this one's sufficient. And we've taken enough time. And so I'll stop. I'll link to the article. You can read the article. But yes, all that to say, pro-lifers should never kidnap people.
Please do not kidnap
certainly
people.
they shouldn't harm people. I even don't, here's the last thing I'll say. Like, and this is something that, some clarity that Steve Wagner at Justice for All helped me with, was to actually take this even a step further, which is to say, not only should we not harm people, meaning we shouldn't shoot abortion doctors and we shouldn't bomb clinics. So we shouldn't even do the kind of vandalism to an abortion clinic that would make the staff feel unsafe. I don't think that we should be doing the kinds of things, like pro-life people don't have a good enough respect for what it is like to work behind bulletproof glass. And abortion clinic workers walk behind bulletproof glass, most of them, every day on their way to work. And there's a reason for that. And it's really, really bad. It is really, really bad that there are ever people who call themselves pro-life. And I don't think they're pro-life because shooting people is not pro-life. But like, right? So, the fact that did happen enough times that
there's a need
for that is really, really bad. And so pro-life people should be super, super clear. We're against abortion-related violence, and not merely for pragmatic reasons. We have principled reasons too. It's the wrong thing to do.
Exactly. I think we would also, in the realm of the actual abortion clinic, be remiss not talking about the pro-life advocates that are outside of the abortion facility in the film.
Yeah. What were your thoughts about them? So there's protesters out there. They've got signs. They don't have any graphic signs, but they've got kind of, I think, fairly normal pro-life signs. What were your thoughts about them?
I was expecting it to be worse than it was.
Me too. That's so interesting.
But that being said, the perspective of seeing them from the inside of the car, like the way the film is shot, is she's actually in a limo. That's a really long story, but she's going to her abortion in a limo. So she's in the back of the limo and you're like in the back of the limo with her.
Right.
And you see them pulling in. And even though they don't have graphic signs, even though they're, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, you still see what looks like a mob of pro-life people holding pretty generic signs, but like shaking them at her in the car. And that perspective just made me think how important it is that we're really careful about the body language and the signs that we're portraying outside of an abortion clinic.
Yeah.
And if you haven't watched the Sidewalk Counseling Masterclass yet, this is my 30-second plug for why you need to watch the Sidewalk Counseling Masterclass. I didn't even know that you'd watched the Sidewalk.
Have you seen it?
Yes, I watched the Sidewalk Counseling Masterclass.
All right.
Of course I have,
Well, I don't know. Okay, so I've never heard your thoughts on it. Okay, so what would be your plug for it? I'd love to hear this.
I found it really valuable when I first watched it. I've never been sidewalk counseling myself. That's something that I am hoping to get more involved in doing once I'm out of college and out of the like constant dialoguing with college students that I currently do right now. So coming into the course from that perspective of I've never done this before, but I'm interested in doing it, I thought Jacob did a great job of explaining why things like our body language and the signs we have are really important.
Yes.
But in the movie, seeing it from her perspective completely like transformed how I thought about what Jacob was saying. Because in the course, I was like, yeah, totally. That makes sense. We need to have, we need to look a certain way so people seem approachable. Yeah. But then seeing it from Veronica, you're like, wow, these people look intimidating. I would never want to talk to them. Are you kidding me?
Right.
And even though they weren't, holding anything that was directly.
Right. There were no bullhorns. It was just this large group of people, which looked intimidating because how many of them there were, and they were all like crowded together. It wasn't like you had a couple sidewalk counselors and some prayer warriors across the street. Like that was not it. Yeah. It was mob on the driveway. Yeah. And they're waving their signs, even though they were somewhat fine signs. Right.
They weren't some of the signs that they teach in the sidewalk counseling masterclass, which I think are far better for the type of work.
But they weren't beyond the bad. This is like the one part of the movie where they pulled their punch. Yes. They could have made this way over the top.
And they didn't.
And including Veronica's reaction. Like she's not like hyper freaking out and having a panic attack or something because these people, they just look nervous, alert, affected, but it's not over the top. I feel, and I like what you're saying because it's like, it helps, I think, us to potentially empathize a little bit better with, okay, this is hard for sometimes, I think both pro-life and pro-choice people, how do we get into the other person's shoes, kind of imagine what life is like in that person's world. And if we could do that better, maybe we wouldn't be shaking signs at people and,
It just looked very unwelcoming. Like
Yes.
if I was Veronica,
you're not walking over there.
I'm not going to walk over and want to talk to one of them.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like they want to help me.
Yeah.
I don't feel like they're open to hearing my perspective. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm just going to get yelled at.
Yeah.
Even though they weren't actually yelling.
Right.
But I felt like I would get yelled at if I
Yeah.
tried to talk to them.
Yeah.
Just because of the body language of how they were portraying themselves.
So sidewalk counselors or even protesters, like be thinking about the way that you look from the outside, from the other person's perspective. It's not just about what your signs say. It's like, how does this look? And that's been a thing that I've thought about a lot when I'm at any abortion clinic and I'm kind of assessing the pro-life presence. I'm thinking about it not just from the pro-lifers' perspective, which is usually very peaceful, loving. We care about the babies. We also care about the women, but it's like, yes, but how does this look? Ask yourself, how does this look to a nervous woman who is having the worst day of her life and has been probably told a lot of false things about you, or she's expecting the worst of the pro-life movement because that's what she's heard talked about on MSNBC or whatever, right?
Exactly. Or she's just been kidnapped by pro-lifers in the case of this movie.
Right. It's like there's almost never been a time that I've been in front of an abortion clinic where I wouldn't recommend some changes. Let's just say that. And I don't want to name any names. Yeah. I'm just going to say there's almost always ways to make it better and more inviting. And you should totally watch the Sidewalk Counseling Masterclass because we have a whole module just on the signs. What are good signs? What are a bunch of signs that are not helpful? Not to say that people that have those signs are bad. It's just like some signs are going to be more effective than others because you've got to get them to come to you if you want to have that conversation. So yeah, anyway, I'm really glad that you brought that up. Let's go ahead and talk about the abortion itself. Again, this happens at the end of the movie. There are a lot of movies or TV shows where like there will be an abortion plot that comes up and usually they don't go all the way with it, if you will. They'll like either she will have a very convenient miscarriage and then it's like, hey, they never really had to make the decision or she will kind of choose life at the end, but in a way that's kind of pro-choice. Like, hey, I just kind of realized that I can do this and I'm woman, hear me roar, and I'm just going to do this. And then you don't have this. In this movie, I actually kind of thought maybe this movie might do that at the end.
But it did.
Like it's been enough propaganda preachiness about pro-choice.
Nope.
But no.
Nope.
I mean, so talk a little bit about how it was portrayed and let's just discuss that.
So the day of the abortion, right? She arrives at the clinic after seeing these protesters outside and she gets in and Kevin is there, oddly enough, the awkward boyfriend.
Right.
We'll kind of skip over that part. She breaks up with him. Things
Kevin.
are bad.
He's an idiot.
And then as soon as Kevin's gone,
although let's say one thing about Kevin. Let's say one thing about that point where what's kind of interesting to me about this moment is Kevin actually does a thing that surprised even me in that moment, in the sense where he kind of went and did what pro-choice people really do want boyfriends to do, which is to say, look, it's completely your decision. I'm going to support you either way. But he's also like desperately trying to also like stay with her. And again, they're not compatible. She doesn't want to be with him. He's lost his chance,
desperation
kind of a thing. It was a very desperation
for him.
Right.
He was like, I'll support you no matter what. I just want to be with you forever.
Right.
Was pretty much his like closing move. And she was like, no, not happening.
Right. So that's not the move. Don't be saying, look, it's like whatever you do. I don't want people to say like if your friend's going to have an abortion, like don't say like, I can't be friends with you if you have this abortion. I have heard pro-life people basically advocate that. It's like, what, you would be friends with an SS officer? Like that kind of thing. Like something like that. Again,
not helpful.
No. But at the same time, I think it's possible to be too over the top supportive. If you've encouraged your friend not to have an abortion and try to get them to some resources and help them out and everything. For example, I don't think you should drive someone to an abortion clinic. Like if you're opposed to abortion, you're like, well, I'm going to be the supportive one. Like there's some point where it's like, I feel like this is too close to kind of tacit support of the thing or helping make this thing possible that I don't think people should do. And he kind of just goes over the top in that way. Anyway, okay, moving on.
So
Kevin leaves.
And then suddenly all of the music changes And we are here in this spa.
Yeah.
And it honestly reminded me, there was this nurse, and she sounded like one of the people on NPR.
Yeah.
She just had this very calming voice.
Yeah.
And she narrated the entire abortion experience like this.
Narrated in a very interesting way, in the sense of not talking about what was actually going to be done.
Right.
The phrase, "the wand will go inside you and remove the fetus."
Oh, that was my favorite thing.
Was actually used. And it's like, okay.
Yes. Can we talk for a moment about the use of the term wand?
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
That particular, I mean, yes, I have heard wand used in medical contexts before. Like, it's not like that word is completely, sure. Like, it's not like that word is completely absent from medical jargon.
Right.
But the word wand, especially in this context, in this movie, you could not help but associate with like a magic wand. Right.
I was like, what, a magic wand's going to make it disappear?
Right, it's just going to go away.
Yeah.
It's not a problem at all. And that, I think, also ties in with how Veronica talks about the abortion throughout the entire film. She really only calls it an abortion maybe twice.
Yeah.
She, throughout the whole entire production, you can see her struggling to know what to call it. She calls it a procedure. She calls it the thing. And she calls it, quote, "I'm taking care of it." It's only until about like an hour into the film that she even calls it an abortion.
Yeah.
And even after that, she struggles to call it an abortion again.
Yeah.
She's always struggling for words and feels like, you know, she can't actually call it what it is. And then when the actual abortion happens, we have this magic wand that just makes the thing, the problem, go away. And it's like this magical, peaceful moment where all of her problems are resolved.
Yeah.
And there's no clarity about what actually is happening in this procedure.
Yeah. I think there's one thing going on about this. This is the one thing that, you know, when I'd watched this one other pro-life person, and I don't want to name who it is because I don't want to seem overly critical. I just had a different kind of take than seated on the movie, generally speaking. But there's one point that I feel like C made that I agree with, which is that there is a normalizing kind of a thing that this movie is, I think, attempting to do. Of like, you know, you're portraying Veronica, who is uncomfortable saying the word abortion because like of society around her and all the crazy people that still debate this. And then by the end of it, she is fully empowered. She is accepting of this. She's embracing it. She's willing to use the word, you know, like, you know, no matter what people think about it. And this is portrayed as like, this is huge personal growth for her. And that is a normalizing kind of thing that I think it's not the kind of thing that I want to see happen. About abortion.
Oh, you're entirely correct. I actually watched an Entertainment Tonight interview with the director.
Oh, interesting.
And she talks explicitly about how the purpose of this movie is to normalize abortion.
What?
Yes. She had an abortion herself.
Oh.
The name of the director is Rachel Lee Goldenberg. And so there's an Entertainment Tonight interview with her talking about how she had an RU46 abortion. And she wanted to make a movie. Like, it's based on a book, so it's not like she, you know, wrote it.
Okay.
But the big concept behind her portrayal of this movie is she didn't want to make something where Veronica was debating about what to do. Like, Veronica has made her decision, and she wants to normalize Veronica's decision.
Yeah.
And she does that through several, like, very specific ways that I noticed throughout the film.
Like
one of them being how she talks about it. And she, you know, the character of Veronica becomes empowered throughout the film to talk about her abortion more openly. But she also includes, there's a couple lines in there. Specifically, Bailey refers to it as this very basic medical procedure that 1 out of every 4 women have. Like, they have a little conversation about how normal this is. And the fact that Veronica is choosing it is super normal. And, you know, she's perfectly entitled to do this. They also kind of normalize it just in the family. So we talked about earlier how Veronica is from this Catholic family.
Yeah.
And they reference the fact that the other daughter in the family also was having sex in high school, didn't decide to have an abortion, and had a kid.
Right.
But they're normalizing the idea that even among the, you know, these stereotypically conservative families, it's totally normal for people to be having sex in high school, for people to be getting pregnant and making, you know, the women to be making these decisions. We shouldn't be thinking about this as
like a controversial thing.
Exactly,
Right.
a controversial thing. This is what everyone does.
Right.
And you conservatives need to wake up and
Right.
see that everyone is doing this. So
Right.
why are we continuing to even have this discussion?
Yeah.
It should not be this hard to access abortion.
Yeah. And
You shouldn't have to go on this
culminates
crazy road trip.
in this huge rant that she gives. So, like, it's maybe one of the most preachy moment of the movie where it's like, why? Like, I should just be able to walk into a place without my parents knowing about it in my own town and say, my boyfriend's an idiot. I need, I need this abortion. I just be able to have it. It shouldn't be any big deal. Why should it be this huge thing? And it's like, okay, on one hand, like, is anyone else paying attention to the fact that there is an underage girl that is now, 3 states away and has been, her life's been at risk
Like
multiple
many
times, and no one, and her parents have no idea where she is? Like, I don't feel like the movie might be making the point as well as they're trying to, because I'm like, as a parent, I'm like, oh, this is really, really bad.
This is so bad.
Like, they are like both quite vulnerable in a
Yes.
lot of the situations in this
They've
movie.
been driving a stolen car, sleeping outside in
Yeah.
the middle of nowhere.
They ultimately get kidnapped
And
by
they get
scary
kidnapped.
people.
They bang on the door and get picked up by this really sketchy limo driver named Bob, who is eating a carrot off of a knife at
They
one
get
point.
a ride with a truck full of 10 or 12 guys.
Yes, who
I'm
are
like-
definitely smoking things.
Right.
And so many things in this movie are so sketchy.
This could have gone worse than it did.
Yes.
It really could have.
But everyone is super nice to them along the way for the most part, except the pro-lifers.
Right.
All the
Right.
kind of sketchy Bob the limo
that all
driver
works
guys.
out really well.
Right. It's great. Everything works out great.
Yeah.
Except for the pro-lifers. They're the ones that are causing the problems.
Yeah. I wanted to say something else about the abortion scene or sequence. There was something interesting where, so she's, before the abortion, she's having the one-on-one with the nurse. And this always happens. A nurse is going to tell you some things. And the very first thing she asks is, were you coerced? Did you, I don't remember the exact words, but it's are you choosing this yourself today? And this is portrayed, I think, to me in the movie is this is a good thing that the nurse is doing, which is interesting because there have been multiple state legislative battles over trying to force abortion clinics to ask that question or make every abortion client sign a form. One of many forms they're going to sign that day. Pro-lifers would be trying to get her add a form that just says she's signing a thing that says that she was not coerced into this abortion. Because my goodness, if we can't find common ground on anything else, seems like we should
be able to find common ground on that.
Right.
No one wants anyone being coerced
You're
into
pro-choice, right? You're her choice, not the boyfriend's choice, not her parents' choice.
Right.
You want this to be her making the decision, right? And yet Planned Parenthood would be fighting those bills. Because it came from a pro-life source or whatever. I don't even know what I don't know there's that many good arguments for them to be using. But they would actually fight these bills. And it's okay, in the super, super preachy pro-choice movie, it's portraying it's a good thing that the doctor was asking her, hey, you consent to this, right? This is your decision, right? It's okay, is Planned Parenthood now on our side on this? We all agree it's good that we're doing these anti-coercion forms in abortion clinics, or are they cringing when she asked that question? I wish that in that state they didn't have to ask that. I honestly don't know. I don't know the answer to that question because they actually have fought those bills before.
It honestly makes no sense to me. I was very confused about that when I watched it because the way they portrayed it, you're supposed to feel while you're watching it that's a good question.
Yeah.
Because of the music happening, because of the very calm nurse voice. And so I felt like that was supposed to be this great, yay, abortion clinics doing the right thing, making sure that women are empowered and making this decision on their own. But that seems so contradictory to what we've seen Planned Parenthood do. Now, it was not a Planned Parenthood in the film.
Right.
It was an independent abortion clinic of some type. But the idea that we should be asking women that question, yet Planned Parenthood has fought that in many cases, was confusing.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Did you have anything else you want to say about obviously the rest of the abortion sequence is pretty it's very chill. Everything is super cool. She has no post recovery needed.
I was so confused. So she went under
Yeah.
She was asleep during the procedure.
She took the general anesthesia.
Yep. And then she woke up and she was totally fine.
Yeah.
One of the questions that they asked was like, do you have someone to drive you home? I'm sorry, but she did not need someone to drive her home.
No, yeah, she seemed fine.
Totally fine. And like eating burritos 2 seconds afterwards and was so wide awake and like life was great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Has anyone ever gone asleep and then been that fine after a surgery?
I mean, obviously, I don't want to speak for everyone. What I can say is I know just because of my work, a lot of people who have had abortions. Okay. Like I've spoken with them on the same stages and had conversations or read their books or whatever. And I think people's abortion experiences, there's probably a fairly wide spectrum. I don't think it's good for pro-life people to act like every abortion experience is a horror show. Okay. It's not. And most women do feel relief after, like emotional relief. What you see on Veronica's face, the emotion, that is very normal. Most women do instantly feel relief. They don't regret their abortion until later, sometimes years and years and years later. And so that part feels pretty accurate. But let's just say there are a lot of women who have had surgical abortions, whether under general or local anesthetic, who have had far worse experiences both during and after. I mean, if she's under general anesthesia, then she's not feeling anything then. But but most women go local anyway because it's a lot less expensive. And certainly after, like, there can be quite the recovery period. And it just feels like, is this feminism to like act like this procedure that some women have described as being the most painful experience of their life as being like super, super cool? Don't worry, it's going to be totally fine, because it feels deceptive to me unless I have been told a whole bunch of lies about what it's like to have an abortion.
Right. And when I watched this interview on Entertainment Tonight, the director mentioned kind of this fact. She talked about the idea that they had a ER abortion nurse who was on set during the entire filming of that, because the director's goal was to make this abortion sequence as close to real life as possible. Her words, not mine. So I heard her say that, and then I watched this sequence, and I was like, I feel like this is not compatible with what I have heard of women's, not their emotional experiences, but just their physical experience of what you go through in a surgery.
Right.
I mean, this is a surgery.
Right.
And so the fact that she specifically mentions in her interview that she went out of her way to want to make this as accurate as possible by bringing someone on set who does abortions to consult with about how we're making this look isn't lining up to me.
Yeah. I would love to hear, some women who have had surgical abortions, especially any that have gone under general anesthetic, to make it as analogous as possible, to watch that sequence of the film. If you can't, like if you've gone through healing and it's not going to be super triggering and all that, I would just love to hear from them on like them comparing and contrasting, because I don't want to, believe that the movie's exaggerating if it's not. It doesn't line up with what I've heard. But of course, it's possible that I've heard exaggerated accounts too. Like I want to be careful here and not overstate my case, but I'm skeptical. How about that? I am very, very skeptical.
Very, very skeptical.
Yeah. So because kind of the most preachy point where Veronica kind of has this huge epic rant about how crazy the abortion situation is in the country. Like, she focuses a lot of it on parental consent laws. How dare people make it so she would have to get consent from her parents? And watching that, I can understand how people would be like, yeah, like she seems super adult-like she's barely not 18 kind of a thing. Like, this all seems like arbitrary. And I would just say, like, I get it, but there's a reason that parents are supposed to consent to their kids' medical procedures in general. Like, a lot of times it's the parents more than the kids or the teenagers even who are tracking, like, what are their medical allergies? What are, what kinds of like physical conditions might they have that could be exacerbated by a doctor who doesn't know or whatever, and is in charge of their child's well-being, and maybe should at least know if their child is having minor surgery 3 states away. Like, I just like,
or even just maybe know that their child is 3 states away.
Yeah.
Period.
I mean, there's that too. Like, So I don't feel like the movie did an amazing job of arguing against parental consent laws. Like, I think like the more interesting argument I've heard against parental consent laws is the case of like, what if the parents are abusive? What if her dad is literally going to beat her up if he finds out that she's pregnant because the state's mean old pro-life law forced her to do that? And for every state that has parental consent or parental notification laws that I'm aware of has a judicial bypass option where if she does have an abusive parent, she can go to a judge instead and have the judge approve it. And frankly, I have heard from former clinic workers that loophole is used all the time. That Planned Parenthood will sometimes have a lawyer on retainer who will like, I'm going to help walk the teenager through the judicial bypass process so we can avoid regardless of what's going on. She can have the best parents in the world, doesn't matter. And that's a whole ethical question of who is the lawyer really representing? It's not good. But that's a more interesting argument, I think, than what the movie portrayed. Like, I get the movie. I mean, I think it's just anytime you're going to draw a line at this age, situation A happens, and then when you turn this, 1 year later, it's a different situation. Like, all of those is going to be a little bit arbitrary, and you've got to draw the line at somewhere. And they intentionally picked like the oldest possible person that could still be affected by parental consent laws. And,
exactly. The film doesn't really make an argument at all for parental consent laws. It simply causes you to want to feel sympathy for her because of the age they make her and this crazy journey that she has to go through.
Right.
It's making an emotional argument against parental consent laws, not an actual
it's almost this assumed thing. I mean, she does go on this rant. It's like, I can't believe how crazy this whole situation is, blah, blah, blah. But it's almost just like, it's just like an assumed thing. Like, at this point, like, if you're not on her side at this point, like, we're not going to try to like convince you. Right. That kind of feels more like the approach. Let's talk briefly about common ground. This was a thing that I thought was really good that you said, like, let's talk about this. So there are a few things that we can agree with the film on. We can almost always agree with something that pro-choice people say. This is an example of that. So you wrote down a couple of good examples of common ground. Go ahead and walk through that.
So the first one that I noticed, there's kind of this subplot in the movie that we haven't talked about at all. So Bailey, Veronica's friend who's traveling with her, has a really estranged relationship with her father.
Yeah.
And her father just happens to own this plant shop in Albuquerque, which is where they're going for this abortion.
Right.
And so when they're there, she shows up at her dad's store and wants to say hello and try to kind of patch things up with her father.
Or confront him or something.
We're not really
He's
clear
like a
on
deadbeat
exactly
dad.
what her motives
He
are.
walked out on her and her mom.
Yes, exactly. And so she shows up and says hi to her dad. And her dad's reaction is real bad.
Yeah.
Really, really bad. He is clearly disinterested in seeing her, does not want her there, does not want to associate with her.
Doesn't want to know her.
He doesn't want to know her at all.
Yeah.
He offers to give her money to go away.
Right.
And Veronica is like hiding behind a plant. And she pops out kind of at the end of this conversation and confronts Bailey's dad about how horrible of a father he is being.
Yeah.
And the line that really got to me was when Veronica says to him, quote, "You think that being a father is just sending a few checks a year and that's that." And I think that really hits home with one of the things that we talk about often. And we've talked about it on some ERI podcasts in the past, where you have the idea that there needs to be better laws, yes, but even just expectations around what fathers do in an unplanned pregnancy or in any pregnancy.
Yeah.
That our child support laws are pathetic.
Yeah.
And Veronica is right.
Yeah.
Fatherhood is not just sending a few checks a year and washing your hands of the whole situation.
Yep.
And not caring about getting to know your child.
Yeah.
And so they, I think, accurately portray the way that some fathers are towards their children. They don't want to get to know them.
Yeah.
They want to just send a few checks and that's it. And never really take responsibility for this child that they have helped create and want to love this child and get to know this child.
Yeah.
And so Veronica confronting him on that was a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's one thing, like, if there's guys that are in the situation where it's like they want to have the relationship, but they are separated and the wife has all the has been given the control over the kids and doesn't want that, and it's like he wants that, but she doesn't want that, and is kind of blocking that. Right, then that's one thing, but that's not the situation.
That's not at all what happened here. He walked out.
Right. He didn't want kids.
He did not want kids. I think the actual backstory they say is that he wanted the mom. Yeah. He did not want kids. She wanted kids.
Right.
As soon as the relationship with the mom started going downhill.
In his from his perspective.
From his perspective, right? As soon as from his perspective,
as soon as they started having kids,
started having kids, and things weren't going as great.
Then he was out.
He was out. He was disinterested.
He moved 1,000 miles away.
Yes, he moved 1,000 miles away, and so that's some really important common ground I think to point out if you're talking about this film with someone who's pro-choice.
Yeah, we agree that fatherhood is more than just sending checks.
Yes,
or it ought to be.
And we need to have a better attitude in our culture towards what fatherhood is.
Yeah.
And totally how fathers should be expected to behave. Good.
We also agree that kidnapping is wrong. We've talked about that.
We talked about that.
We're all on that, so we can all agree. We can all agree that PRCRVs shouldn't have huge baby heads glued to the front of the RVs and chase people around, yelling at them through a bullhorn. We all agree on that.
Yeah. I think as we're kind of wrapping up this podcast, we definitely need to talk about how the film itself wraps up and the common ground that we can find there. Because the film ends with this sequence where Veronica goes home, and her mom has found out that she had this abortion. Yeah. And she and her mom
her pro-life mom. Her pro-life
Catholic mom finds out that this happened.
Right.
And her mom's reaction to Veronica is interesting.
Yeah.
And good, I think, in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt complicated, but I agree. There's more common ground here than I think pro-life people would expect. So just to give a little context, basically Veronica, what she says first when she gets in the room, she's the first one to speak. Yeah.
She tells her mom that she does not feel badly about having the abortion.
Right. She's owning it.
Right. She's owning it. She says, I feel like I'm supposed to feel badly, but I just don't.
Yeah.
I knew this was the right decision for me, but I'm scared that you're going to hate me.
Yeah.
And then the mom reacts, and the very first thing she says is, no. I love you.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
That is very, very good.
And that is very good. That is some serious common ground we have right there.
Yes.
That the very first words out of the mom's mouth were, no, I do not hate you for what you did.
Right.
And the mom does say, I don't understand your decision. I don't like your decision.
Right.
It's not like the mom is saying you made the right decision. She's not saying that what her daughter did was right.
She says, I might not ever understand the decision.
Right. But I still love you more than that decision.
Right. And like what I wish that she had said a little bit differently, like the I might not never understand the decision, I feel like is very kind of pulling the punch. Like she doesn't just not understand the decision. She believes that Veronica paid a doctor to kill a baby. And so
she's not very explicit about that.
Yeah, she's phrasing it as I just don't understand it. Like I don't understand why you decided to vacation in that place. Like it's like that phrase I feel like is not enough.
But at the same time, her daughter just came home from that experience, and I feel like we're only seeing, in my mind, in my hope, this is part of that conversation.
Yeah,
where maybe the first thing you say to your daughter that's had an abortion shouldn't be, I believe
you killed a baby.
You killed a baby.
Totally
like
agree.
that should not be the first thing.
I'm not saying that. Yeah.
Right.
Good point.
So just to clarify.
Yes.
Yes. Now,
I love you. I'm glad you're home. I'm glad you're safe. Yes. Those are the first things. Let me hug you. You know, you were safe here. Yes. That is all.
But the specific phrasing of, I don't think I'll ever understand it.
Right.
Somewhat implies relativism, honestly. That like, you can make that decision. That's okay for you. I don't understand but that's okay.
Well, what she said, I felt like even was more of a red flag for me about relativism, where she says, I know this was the right decision for me. Like, it's like, okay, this is more complicated than that, guys. Like,
yes.
Moral philosophy. And all the philosophers understand it's more complicated than that. And no, like, they're not arguing relativism anymore. I know we still hear it sometimes. We're hearing it less often now because it's an internally absurd contradictory view. But yes, there is a little bit of that in there. And it wasn't, I think maybe the reason that the conversation rubbed me a little bit wrong was because I felt like the implication, and maybe I'm wrong, was that this kind of feels like the one and only conversation they will ever have about this. Like, they're done. Like,
this should not be the only conversation that they're having about
And I'm like,
this.
if that, like, it shouldn't be. That's exactly right. Like a week later, there should be another conversation or whatever. Or whatever. A month later, maybe with a therapist, maybe with whatever. Like, I don't, but it shouldn't just be, oh, honey, I don't know if I'm ever going to understand. Like, I think there's more that should be said at some point, but I agree, not on that day.
And we just don't get to see that.
We don't get to see the rest of it.
Because then it ends.
Yes, it's all over.
Done.
Roll the credits. It's all
Bailey
awesome.
And Veronica are best friends again.
Yeah, everything's great.
Because it's really a girl bonding movie. Yeah. It's the girl bonding movie while we're getting an abortion.
Yep. So I will say I liked this movie less than I thought I would, in the sense of, like, it's not a great movie, and I was expecting it to be better than it was. Most movies and shows and things that I've seen from even like HBO are just a lot higher quality than this. This was super preachy compared to, I feel like, most Hollywood stuff. Like, this is like, it's a reminder of, like, the reason why there's a really good YouTube video on this. I'll see if I can find it and link to it. But a Christian artist, I don't remember exactly what his role is, but a Christian made a series of a couple of videos explaining exactly why Christian music and Christian movies are so bad, generally speaking. And it's really, really insightful. Like, it's like, he explains it a lot better than even I could. And part of what he explains is, like, Christians aren't good at subtext, right? This is why, like, Christian movies are so, like, the writing is so on the nose. We are saying exactly what we want you to know, what we think. There's no subtext, there's no subtlety to it. And we're usually, movies that are trying to advance a more liberal agenda are using subtext, or more subtle, and are a lot more effective because they're also making a much better movie. And so this was a case where there was less subtext than usual. The writing was not as good as usually is done. It was still a better made movie than any Christian movie that I've seen. And that still makes me sad. This movie, really sad. It still had a lot of humor. There was legitimately good humor in the movie. It was filmed well. There were extras. Like, that's a thing you don't usually see in Like, it's just like, I really still just want to see Christians get better at making movies. I think it'll happen. They are getting better. They are getting better.
Yes, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, it is getting better on that trajectory.
Way down there, I think. But yes. So I would like to see, like, if Christians could make a movie this good, that would be pretty good. But at the same time, like, even this movie kind of, I think, makes one of the big mistakes that Christian movies often make. Like, I could have seen this movie been done the other way around, where it's like a pro-life movie and it's just written like the opposite. And this preachy, like, this is why a lot of people don't like Christian movies. Is they're too preachy, too on the nose.
It gets annoying.
Yeah.
Just when you watch this movie, it gets annoying.
Yeah.
Because it's so over the top, exaggerated, and so explicit in its content of hating pro-lifers and this abortion is the greatest experience of my life.
Yeah.
That I feel like it's difficult to believe even for a pro-choice person. Like, you're going to like it and you're going to think it's funny as a pro-choice person.
Right. But you're going to be glad for the message it's trying to send. You're like, at a political level, you're going to be like, yeah, I hope a lot of people see this movie, but not because...
Not because it was actually good at arguing good art. For your... Yes.
Yeah. Or for arguing for your
through
view.
Art.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I would really like to, and I haven't read any reviews. I would love to know what, like, just like normal, like, movie reviewers, just like secular movie reviewers, what they think about this movie. Do they think that this is good? If they do, are they defending it because it's, like, on their side politically, and people on the left feel like pretty much on the defense right now because we have Trump and we have Republican majorities and all of that. Or are they like, I agree with the politics, but it's a bad movie. Like, I'm really legitimately curious, and I haven't read any of those because I didn't want to get, I more affected for this podcast. But now I'm kind of curious, like, what is this movie's, Rotten Tomatoes rating and end up being, or IMDb score or whatever? I'm curious. It's not a very good movie. So it is so good to finally have you on the podcast. I hope this is helpful to people listening. And again, you might hear about this movie. I don't think you're going to hear about it as often as Handmaid's Tale, but you're going to hear about it. And hopefully now you'll have at least a couple of insightful things that you can say about it. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. And I'm very much looking forward to doing more of these with you.
Thanks so much for having me, Josh.
Thank you for listening to the Equipped for Life podcast, a project of Equal Rights Institute. Equal Rights Institute uses speaking, writing, YouTube videos, podcasts, online courses, and campus outreach to help pro-life advocates in the areas of practical dialogue tips, relational apologetics, pro-life philosophy, and sidewalk counseling. If you've been helped by this podcast, please consider supporting it by making a donation at equalrightsinstitute.com.